Trust me, today we are just going to round up our discussion on objects and classes, and we will talk about the exam. We'll review the exam for exam two, things to expect for exam two, to be honest. And that'll be it. I think we have a very small class today, and I won't be taking much of your time as well. So, just before we start to talk about the topic of today, I would also like to emphasize that most of the assignments are in terms of the Zybooks challenge and participation activity for lesson 8, as well as all the lesson quizzes. So perhaps some people did not do the quiz before the exam one. So all the quizzes, both from exam one, I mean lesson two, three, four, and now exam two, lesson five, six, and seven. All the end of lesson quizzes are due tomorrow as well, Friday, 24th of April. So I really don't want you guys to miss any of this because they are part of your grades. I think the end of lesson quiz is taking about 12%. I'm pretty not sure, but we can check and see. Yes, 12%. Absolutely correct. So 12% of your total grade. So it is important you complete these quizzes as at when due to have your uh, total marks for this assignment time. So that being said, I would just like to round up lesson 8, and let us talk about the difference between variables of primitive data types and object data types. We we know primitive data types. These are, you know, integers, double, character, Boolean. So these are primitive data types. These are just basic data type we use to store values in memory. We need to use to store values in memory. So these are like we naming a variable in num apple equals to 2. These are primitive data type. Integers, they are floating points, character and Boolean data types. So these are primitive data type. And we have another data types, uh, object type. Object type. What does objects do? In Java, objects are stored in memory, and the variable do not hold the objects themselves. They don't. So the variable, for instance, I was saying int I. Yeah, int I is actually holding the value 1. Integer is actually holding the value 1. However, in object data type, circle is not holding, not holding the object itself. C is not holding the object. What is C doing? It is referencing. So it creates like a reference point in memory. So it is referencing. So this means that multiple variables can be pointing to just one object. So that's the basic difference between primitive type and the object type. In object type, two or more variables could be pointed to just one single object because that's just a reference point in memory. That's just a reference point in memory. However, in the primitive data type, we're actually storing the exact value. So this variable stores the exact value directly in primitive data type. So let's go to the example we have here. So let's say what happens when we're trying to copy values of both the primitive type and the object type. So for instance, in primitive type assignment, we have our integer data type, which is one of the primitive data type. We can have floats, double, but for this example, we have an integer and it says I equals to j. When the value of I is 1, you know, and the value of j is 2, that is, this is the original value. This is what we have originally. I equals to 1 when we're declaring j equals to 2. Then, now we have this assignment operator telling us that I now equals to j. Then I is now what? I is now j because j is 2. So I is now equals to 2. And j still maintain its value 2. So after the assignment, I actually change the value stored in memory. So it is copying the value of j because we have equate I as j. I equals is equivalent. It's the same thing as j. That's what the assignment operator is telling us here. So after the assignments, I takes what? I takes the value of j and store it in memory. So this one is replaced in memory as what? As 2. Now both values, both variable values, both for I and j are 2, but they are still, they're still completely different variable. So maybe the next line of code, we can now equate j equals to 10. It doesn't mean that I will be equals to 10 because they are independent. The value of j could change later, but it is not a reference. It is not an object type. So I will not change in memory because they are two different, they are two different variable. There is no connection between them. It only operates at that point of the assignment operator. Anything after the assignment operator, the two variable takes their different value. Any question on this? However, in the object type assignment, what happens? We're saying C, which is sec1 equals to sec2. And our sec1, the in memory before, the reference point of this object circle, the radius point is 5. And in circle 2, it's 9. Now we have circle 1 equals to circle 2. So the opposite, exactly the opposite happens here. So what happens? So circle 1, which is C1, takes what? Takes the value of 9. So because they are referencing to a specific object, to the same object. So that means that both C1 and C2 point to the circle with radius 9 after the assignment operator. And the original object with radius 5 is no longer pointing to C1, which is circle 1. So in this sense, object type assignment actually introduce what we call some kind of indirection. So this is why behaviors differs in assignments and method calls, like we see in our user-defined method. Here, Java is not really copying the cycle itself. It's only copied the reference, the point of reference. And here, C1 and C2 are both referring to the same objects in memory after the assignment operator. Question on this. Also, if you understand this and there is no question, any thumbs up? Can you hear me? Only hear me? Thank you. So what happens? What happens to the C1? What happens to the old objects for the object C1 that the you know the that has the radius 5 from the previous example? It is, this object is already, will I call it, it's unused. So it is no longer referencing to any value in memory. It is no longer, because, so what happens? This type of objects are called what? They are called garbage. They are called garbage. Now C1 and C2 is referencing to only C2. So what happens to C1? What happens to C1? The computer, that is the Java compiler, automatically collects this garbage. And what does it do with this garbage collections? It automatically removed unused objects. It automatically remove. And while removing these unused objects, what is it doing? It is freeing our memory. It is reducing redundancy. It is removing unnecessary use of space. And here our technical debt is what? Is being reduced as well. So that's always the beauty of object-oriented programming language. It's always the beauty of object-oriented programming language. All these objects that are not being referenced in memory are later removed automatically. You don't need to write some special lines of code. You know, we don't need some special lines of code to remove these unused objects. The computer automatically remove this object known as what? Garbage in memory. Any question? See, this is what I really want to reference in the last part of the lecture notes. The others are different kind of classes, uh, input classes that we have in Java programming libraries. So for instance, the date class, which we can use, uh, to return the value in terms of date and the time uh, in our program. We also have the random class. These are just the different classes uh, that we have in our Java package, in our Java libraries, and how they can be used. So, of course, read your APIs. You can always read these APIs and see how the different methods within these classes can be used. So, that being said, any question? An object, we can differentiate between objects, classes, methods. We also talk about the different variables, we talked about the global variables and local variables. We talked about the modifiers, the public, private, and of course the default modifiers. How this allows us to, it tells the compiler how the method will be accessed. The different methods we have declared, how will they be accessed? The publicly available to all packages, publicly available to all method within this class, all available to all methods. And if it's private, it is only within that specific. You can only access that method within that specific parts, method declaration, within that the specific method declaration. So, however, in when we're talking about private, so we can also modify private methods. And to modify private methods, we use what we know as the set and the gets. So we use what we know as the set and gets method. This helps us to read and modify private properties of variables. So this modifier they can only be used within this specific method they were declared. We can also use what we know as the get and the set method to read and modify private variables within a class. So then those are the basic things we can talk, and this is more on the visibility. How do we access the different method we have in our class? So that being said, any question, sorry, clarifications you like to make? Thumbs up if there's no questions, we're good to go. Thank you. So let's talk about important, important, in here we're talking about the structure, the guide. I said it in our last class. The exam one will follow the same guide, the same structure that we have for the exam two will follow the same structure that we have for exam one. The format of the exam will be true and false questions, and it will be, multiple choice kind of questions. So what are we going to do? The same thing we did in lesson one. We're gonna trace code. We're gonna see, oh, we're going to act, we put ourselves in the position of a compiler. So we're going to act as a compiler and try to, to execute this program. We're going to debug as well. We're going to test, is this code going to run or not? So we are going to check errors, talking about the logic error and also the syntax error in that sense. So what are the basic concepts we have learned from lesson 5 and to until lesson 7? Of course, we talked about the different loops, types of loops. We talked about the while loops, the for loop, and the do while loop. And we talked about the different structure. Don't forget, when we talked about the loop, we mentioned about 3 basic requirements, regardless of the type of loop. These are required for all types of loop. And when we're talking about the control variable, that's the first requirement. We need our control variable. We need our control variable. And we need our Boolean expression. We need our Boolean expression. That's always the logical, it could be relational, but we need our Boolean expression. That will involve, what is the Boolean expression doing? It's involving the control variable. And the last but not the least of the requirement for any kind of loop we're dealing with is always our modifier. So we have to modify or update. It could be called modifying, it could be called updating the control variable. How do we modify or update our control variable? How do we do this? How do we update our control variable? We do this by using, we can use the argument operators, we can use our incremental operators, where we have the plus plus or the minus minus, plus equals or minus equals. This helps us to break out of the loop, so we don't have an infinite kind of loop. It breaks out of the loop, so we don't have what? An infinite kind of loop. So we should also understand how to differentiate I just talked about the similarity, the commonality between this loops, but there are also differences. In for loops, we have all these requirements in a single line. That's the position in for loops. All the three requirements are always positioned in a single line. The control variable, uh, the Boolean expression, as well as modifying or updating the control variable, all within a single line. However, in our while loop, we have the control variable first. Because while loop, what does while loop say? While loop it may not iterate if the condition is false. Unlike the do while at least it will iterate once. Why is the do while iterating once? Before checking if the expression, if the Boolean expression is true or false. Because the Boolean expression is actually placed later. So we have the control variable first, and we have our modifying or updating our control variable before we have our Boolean expression. So automatically the loop iterates at least once before checking if the condition is true or not. And we also said different problems. The type of loops we use determine on the types of problems we're trying to solve. We said for loop is always recommended when we are sure of the number of iteration. When we're sure of the number of iteration, it's always good to use for loops. However, while loop is always recommended when we do not know. We don't know the number of iteration. We are not sure of how many times our code will be iterating. We also talk about the break and continue statement. Major difference between the statement. The break statement automatically breaks out of the loops. It's once the compiler gets to that statement, it's break out. It doesn't execute the other part of the program within the same block of code. Within the same block of code. However, what a continue does is what? To just stop at that point and execute other parts, you know, other part of the loop. It executes other parts of the loop. However, the break statement breaks out. It exits the loop entirely. So please review your lesson, end of quiz for lesson 5 for all these concepts. And if you have any questions, please do let me know on lesson 5. So I will move to arrays. And we talked about arrays, we talked about these are collection, lists, list of values in rows and columns. In rows and columns. And we also talk about our array list, which is just the list of values. And we talked about two-dimensional arrays, that is in rows and columns. We talked about the syntax for declaring our array. And we talked about one important component of an array, which is our what? Our for loop. How do we populate our array? And we said for loops helps us to populate our array. And we have a special kind of loop. That's the enhanced for loops, a special kind of loops that only operate for our array. And the enhanced array is always used when we are sure of the values, when we know the values to be populated in our array. We use what we know as well, our enhanced for loop. So we also talk about the two-dimensional arrays and the syntax of these two-dimensional arrays. So if you have any questions, review your lesson 6 quiz as well. And if you have any clarification to make on this lesson, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And last but of course not the least we discuss in this class, but for the purpose of the exam, the last lesson that we will be testing you guys on the exam will be on the user-defined method. We have been talking about method. What does method do? It helps us. It gives instructions, commands. to in our programs, it tells us, hey, get the area of a circle. Hey, we want to calculate the area of a circle. And these are just instructions of how our program should behave. We're giving it a specific task that we want this program or this line of code to do. And we talked about the user-defined method as well as a kind of method that is being written by the programmer. The programmer in this sense as the user. We talked about some inbuilt methods within the different classes, we talked about inbuilt method within the math class, inbuilt method within the scanner class, strength class, character class. So we talked about the inbuilt method, and we also talk about how can user the syntax for users to declare a method as well as calling that specific method that has been declared by the user. We talked about the modifier, which helps us, it tells the compiler, how can I access? How should I access this this method? Should it be public? Should it be private? Should, you know, this kind of access of the method. We also talked about the return type. Is it void return type or is it valid return type kind of method? You know, of course, followed by our method, the name of the method, as well as what we talked about the parameters. That is the parameters, the argument we are giving our method. However, we emphasize that this is not compulsory. It is always optional, depending on the kind of problem we are solving. And yes, I already talked about the modifier and talking about the scope of variable. Is this a local variable? Is this a global variable? Don't forget, I emphasize this in lesson 7. Yeah. In Java, we do not really have global variables. We do not really have global variables. However, global variables are known with this keyword. We have to type this specific keyword called what? Static. So there's this keyword called statics. Static when we are declaring what? When we are declaring our global variable. Don't forget that. We talked about method name overloading, and how method could be reused. We talked about the benefits of user-defined methods. Why do we have why? So this helps reusability, we talked about the role of user-defined method in helping to reduce redundancy in our code and allow reusability. We are building our code. It helps us to break our programs down in smaller chunks, promoting modular kind of programming that we have in object-oriented programming language. So I want you to also please go ahead to review your lesson 7 quiz before tomorrow or on or before tomorrow, 24th of April. Review your lesson 7 lesson quiz, end of lesson quiz. Let me know if you have any questions or clarifications on this lesson. And that will be it for the exam. That will be it. You will only be testing you on these 3 basic lesson and the different concepts we have learned from this lesson. That's been said. I just go back to I just go back to our Canvas page, and I want to emphasize, please, because I know some of us joined later in the when later in the call. So I want to emphasize this again before ending today's conversation, and I think this will be our last um last official class for this lesson, for this course, your less end of all end of lesson quizzes. I mean all from lesson 2 until lesson 7 is due tomorrow, 24th of April. You also have your Zybox, your challenge activity and your participation activity for lesson 8 as well due tomorrow, 24th. Your end of lesson quiz takes 12% of your total grades. So they're extremely important. They're extremely important. I know some of us have done this before we had our exam one. So I want you to do the same practice. Use this end of lesson quiz, to study, so to guide your readings for exam two. You can take these lessons as multiple, as many times as possible to help understand this concept better. But I do not want you to forget to submit this uh, end of lesson quizzes. Also, after your end of lesson quizzes, your lesson eight Zybook assignment, I want you to fulfill the check-in for lesson 8. The purpose of this check-in is to see, is your grade well synchronized with Zybook? Is your score or your grades the same thing with what you have on your Zybox? So this helps you to identify problems early and reach out on time so we could fix any errors or problems with your grades. And last but not the least, your exam two. Your exam two testing between, it's always between 6 a.m. until 11:59 p.m. on Thursday. So it's the same process that we have for exam one. It's a 60 minutes timed exam, just like the exam one. And in there you have multiple choice questions, true or false questions, and analog. You'll be using analog. So you have to ensure there are no violations. And I will be more strict for exam two. So I want you to really follow all the instructions and guide for this exam. Yes, I think that will all from my hand. And a question, general question on this lesson, from lesson 2 until lesson 8, from lesson 2 until lesson 8. And a question. Okay, I think last but not the least is our word cost evaluation. Cost evaluation also ends tomorrow, 24th. I can see 9 people have submitted this evaluation, so we are missing about 7 people yet to submit the evaluation. Please, I want you to submit this evaluation. The purpose of this evaluation is to see, please put your recommendation. How can we improve this course? How can we make it better for other learners? And I want you to take this opportunity to provide your feedback on the course and even the instructor, myself. How can I improve? This is my first time teaching this course. You know, it was a first experience for me. So how can I, as a person, improve this course? How can I make it better? So I am really, really looking forward to your evaluation, to your contribution on how this course can be improved. Um, any questions? This is really fun, taking this course and having you in this class. Any questions, comments, feedbacks? Please, you can use the mic, unmute yourself. You can use the chat. Okay, thumbs up if you're good to go, and we can round off this class as a whole. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful experience. On Thursday, on the exam day, next week, Thursday, I will be connecting. You don't have to attend the classes. It is not a class, but I will be connecting. Should you can pop in if you have any question, and we can go through it together before the exam. So if you have any question after the exam, any clarification to make, please come in. I will be online from 9:45 until 11 exactly, just the same way for the class period. So, no question. I think we can round up this class. And I want to say a very big thank you to all of you. Thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your semester and have fun during the spring break. And congratulations to those of you that will be graduating this semester. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You're welcome.
you.